You're here at the Concordia Summit talking about public-private partnerships, economic development and political development specifically in Eastern Europe. How can there be economic and political development in Eastern Europe now without thinking about what's going on in Russia with President Putin and what has happened in the Ukraine?
You can't. Obviously, those are the driving factors on all the areas that's being discussed here at the Concordia Summit. But we also can recognize the fact that countries like Poland, the Baltics, others in Eastern Europe have done rather well overall. They've made a transition, sometimes 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but they've made a transition into functioning democracies. And some of the lessons learned, especially from their economic growth standpoint, I think is well worth discussing. Even though, obviously, when there's the conflict going on, that dominates the conversation. But as I ended up, the panel we were just on, if you look at these countries that were represented there, Latvia, Poland, and Georgia, 25 years ago, it's been almost miraculous.
The president last night on TV said that U.S. intelligence had underestimated the strength of ISIS and overestimated the ability of the Iraqi government. Do you agree with that? Is it okay? Is it fair to say that it was an intelligence failure?
Not that it was intelligence failure or not. I don't have access to, quote, intelligence. It was my eyes. And that was, I saw and predicted. We predicted, Lindsey Graham and I predicted that these events would take place. Now, did the Iraqi army deteriorate faster than maybe I thought? Perhaps. But the result has been the same. And the other decision, of course, that has led to ISIS, which is just tragic, is when he overruled his Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and head director of CIA, and overruled their strong recommendation to arm the Free Syrian Army. Those 2 events put together set the table for the catastrophe we're in. And finally, if I could say, most presidents that I've known in history and read about take responsibility themselves. After all, he brags about being commander-in-chief. So to blame it on the intelligence agencies, it's disappointing. I wouldn't be nearly as upset with President Obama if he would have just admit that he was wrong. I want him to succeed.
How many troops would we have to send in to end the threat from ISIS?
That would do the kind of work that only they can do. And right now, by the way, even in Iraq, they're not sending them down to the combat level. They're up at the brigade level. And look, I think it's a tough decision, a very tough decision. But the American people ought to be given those options. And now these airstrikes, how many times have you seen the one picture of the building blown up? Okay, how many? 100, 200, 500? They are not striking many targets. And the targets they are striking are stationary targets. They're not people moving around.
But just to go back to the ground troops issue, because yesterday John Boehner, the speaker, said that if other countries won't provide ground troops, the U.S. would have no choice. I think I'm paraphrasing him correctly. And in the past, I think you said we have 1,100 troops in Iraq already. You know, it's somewhat academic as to whether we have more. So why not just go ahead and say, let's send in ground troops?
Because I don't think we have to, number one. And the more we do send in, the higher likelihood of casualties, which obviously we want to avoid at as much as we possibly can. I think in support roles and special forces roles, intel, and particularly target acquisition, we could have people there. But I don't think it's necessary to send large combat units.
Should the president have does he need another authorization for the use of military force vote? And if there was one, would it pass?
First of all, I think he needs to authorize, not so much because of the Constitution, because there's always the question about his role as Commander-in-Chief, the War Powers Act, etc. but he owes it to the American people with this kind of commitment for us to have an open debate in Congress. Let's have it, and let's decide.
How do you feel about Rand Paul's potential presidential candidacy today?
I think that if Rand Paul wants to run for president, it's a free country, Ethel. What a country, Ethel. I think that that he will run, and I think he will be viable, and I think that it's the more that are engaged, the better. And if he were the nominee of the party, I would support him.